The impact of Alfred Kinsey began in America, but it has rippled around the world. And now Dr. Judith Reisman, who is a visiting professor at Liberty University School of Law, recently returned from the Vatican where this important topic was addressed. Welcome to Faith and Freedom.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, Dean Staver.
You have actually been traveling around the world to speak about the issues of Alfred Kinsey and human sexuality. You've been to the Vatican, you've been to England, Great Britain, and you've also been to the Philippines, and you have other trips that will be coming at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk today a little bit about your trip to the Vatican. This happened at the end of 2011. Tell us about what the purpose of it was and what were the issues that you were addressing.
Well, Dean Staver, as a non-Catholic, I was invited to present my research to an international body of bishops and priests came throughout the world to this retreat just outside the walls of the Vatican in Rome, and invited by an international group that had been dubbed by the prior pope as a group that was designated to help save the families internationally. And those individuals had been familiar with my work and invited me to present my material to this international group of priests and bishops, which I was very pleased to do. Well received, a huge body of individuals, and lots of excellent questions, deep concern, and from that visit in Rome, that is the one that spun off into a request for me to go to Ireland, to Cork, to Dublin, to Vienna, then to London, and then subsequently to the Philippines to deliver the same basic information so people understand how their church and the nation has been so dramatically corrupted.
Now, the gathering there was a gathering of leaders within the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes.
You addressed both the bishops and also other leaders as well from around the world on this issue. And the issue that they were trying to address deals with the family and the undermining of the family. What was it that you brought to them to help them as they address that issue to try to strengthen the family and address the issues of the culture?
Well, they were all unaware of how this began, of the origin. When there's been a tremendous amount of research in the Catholic Church on the pedophile priest issue. And the John Jay report came out, which attempted to identify how come so many priests were involved in the sexual abuse of children, mostly boys, by the way. So it would be these are homosexual acts because they were men molesting boys. And as a result, they began to look back to try and figure out when this began and so forth. And although there's always been a problem, as there always is everywhere, with sexual molestation, that problem in the church began post-1950s, essentially in about the 1960s is when everything began to spin off the charts in terms of abuse. And I'm the one that walked in with some explanation as to how come.
So they're tracking this historically within the
Yes.
Roman Catholic Church. And
That's
the
right.
issue that we all know that has happened over the past couple of decades came to light with regards to the molestation issue. And they looked at it historically and found that it was in the 50s to early 60s that all this began. Amazingly, Dr. Alfred Kinsey wrote his first book about sexuality in the human male in 1948 and sexuality in the human female in 1953.
Correct.
And, of course, that is now commonly known as the K-bomb.
Yes.
That it actually dropped the K-bomb on the greatest generation coming back from the war here in America. And, of course, that rippled around the world. So in context, you're trying to give them some answers as to the ultimate origin of why they began to see these results happening within the Roman Catholic Church.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the sociosexual history that our historical individuals in charge of scientific history don't want to deal with. Everyone seems to just assume that all this was going on all along. No one wanted to report it, which of course goes against everything we know in terms of history and in terms of reportage. It didn't it wasn't going on for forever. It did spin out of a major cultural change, and that cultural change has been well identified as the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution had a father that they always dubbed the father of the sexual revolution. That was Kinsey. So if you have a revolution, it has huge fallout. And one of the key fallouts was that post-Kinsey, the Catholic Church actually found itself being trained by sexologists who were Kinseyan, from the Kinseyan movement, from the Kinsey model. They were shown pornography in the seminaries, in groups of seminaries where the bishops were so inclined. And the Orthodox priests, people who wanted to be priests, rather, who were going into the seminaries, who were Orthodox and who did not believe in promiscuity, whether heterosexual or homosexual, were simply removed. They were not permitted to become priests because they were, quote unquote, too Orthodox. There were psychologists there who had been trained in the Kinsey model and who were throwing out the I would say, the good priests, because these were people who were not designed to molest children. So the impact of Kinsey was enormous.
So when we look at the 60s here in America, we also have the 60s as the decade of sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right.
And the 70s, of course, continued to build on that. It was a very tumultuous time in America with the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, and the sexual revolution and so forth. That sexual revolution began to transmit itself around the world. And in regards to the Roman Catholic teaching, in terms of the priest, studying to be priest, you're saying that they were actually in some of the seminaries around the world taught by Kinsey sexologists or Kinsey-trained sexologists.
Absolutely.
How did that actually happen where these individuals began to inculcate to these new seminarians, these future priests, Kinseyism?
Well, it turns out that and I'm not a specialist in Catholic dogma, right? But I'm focused on the sexuality part of it. But it turns out that the Vatican II opened a door to saying we have to be more broad-minded. We have to open our eyes to other things, which hit about that time. And there were always in place, and by the way, we have research from Bella Dodd, who was a communist, highly placed communist, who testified that the Communist Party did place I think she said 1,100 communists into the Catholic Church earlier in the 30s and 40s. So this would have been a huge opening for people who wanted to destroy the church. And indeed, the church, there were certain key areas, key seminaries, where the bishops in those seminars did call for human sexuality education, and major books in the Catholic world also began to emerge on, quote, sexuality, and all these people trying to open their minds, open their hearts, and turns out they were opening it up to some pretty disastrous ideas, where they began to write about how we need to recognize that all of these activities are normal, that there ought to be no discriminatory activity view toward homosexuality and so forth. And the doors opened to both heterosexual and absolutely homosexual predation on the parishioners.
Now, that's astounding in terms of the impact that had. Was this something that some of the people were aware of, or was this new information that you were giving them in terms of the origin of some of this, these demographic and these cultural indicators that they saw? Well,
the entire audience was unaware. I mean, it was complete news to them. They were struggling. They were trying to understand what had happened to their church. They were trying to understand the shift in this sexual behavior. So it was very well received, but received with a lot of shock.
We want to continue that discussion tomorrow, and the rest of the week we're going to be talking about some of your discussions that you've been recently involved with around the world. We've been talking to our guest, Dr. Judith Reisman. I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. And we have Dr. Judith Reisman's new book, And in fact, this may well be coming up on TV pretty quickly. We're setting up a time for you to be able to speak about this. It's called Sexual Sabotage. It is a powerful book. It'll actually make you angry when you see it and read it because you will be surprised at the information and the documentation that has ultimately impacted our culture, and ultimately you see it happening in our public schools today. I encourage you to go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org, and order the book, Sexual Sabotage. It's lc.org. You can also sign up for the Liberty Alert right there on the website at lc.org.